Welcome to the 11th edition of RightsCon. My name is Melissa Chan, and I'm a journalist that looks at democracy, human rights, and the rise of authoritarianism. I'll be in the studio all week speaking to just some of the participants, some of the many thousands of participants of RightsCon, including politicians, policymakers, activists, and even creatives. For the first person in the studio, though, we have somebody from Access Now, Nikki Gladstone, director of RightsCon. Basically, without Nikki, there would be no RightsCon. So welcome, and I'm sure you have a lot to tell us about what's new for this year's summit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, maybe thanks to me, but also a giant team from Access Now and the studio and our production teams who've really come together to make RightsCon happen, as well as the, many session organizers and participants who've shaped the program. We're really excited this year to be bringing the studio. We've been doing RightsCon online for the last 3 years, and it's been exceptional to create this online home for RightsCon, but having the studio to act as a home base, I think will be a really welcoming experience for participants, and hopefully a place where people can come and understand what's happening throughout the week of RightsCon. There's a lot of excellent programming. There's a film festival. There are creative exhibits. So it's not just about the meat of the program, the sessions. It's also about, unwinding and meeting people and connecting.
Yeah, because we've just gone through the last 2 years of this pandemic, and it's been hard. And for some people in parts of the world, they're entering a post-pandemic world, but for many others, they're still under lockdown, or they still can't really go out. They certainly can't travel to a summit. So you have this hybrid and this fantastic studio that's my home, but everybody's home over the next week. I mean, it took you a year, right, to plan all this?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think, while everyone is experiencing some return to in-person, there's a lot of different realities around the world. And what we're doing with the studio is bringing a little bit of in-person to RightsCon participants, no matter where they are. I mean, we've been working on this program since last year. Session organizers submit their proposals up until January, and then they work with us over the course of many months to make sure that those sessions are going to achieve outcomes, not just have conversations, but really make sure that they're able to move forward the dial on the work that they're doing. And so it's been months of work to get this program together, and it's going to be excellent. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of this week. This week is going to be exceptional in and of itself, but there's also so much work that's going to carry out into the weeks after RightsCon and the months after RightsCon. So I really think this is going to be an agenda-setting program, and it's going to have a lasting impact.
Awesome, Nikki. Well, with that, let's have our first conversation of the summit. We have Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, in conversation with Executive Director of Access Now, Brett Solomon.
So I'd like to welcome now to the RightsCon stage online the Prime Minister of New Zealand to our opening ceremony. Prime Minister, you're our first head of government that's spoken at RightsCon, so thank you very much and congratulations for being the trailblazer. We're really pleased to have you. Perhaps you'd like to kick off with some opening remarks, and then we can follow up with some questions and get into some detail.
Kia ora koutou katoa na mihi nui kia koutou. Brett, thank you, and to all of the team at Access Now, thank you for inviting me today. And firstly, can I just say how deeply appreciative we are of the work that you do to defend and extend digital rights globally. And to all the distinguished guests, fellow speakers, I know online we're expecting today activists, advocates, academics, journalists, fellow policymakers, tech leaders. Thank you for prioritizing this conversation, because I consider it to be one of the most important that we could be having as political leaders, policymakers, and advocates right now. We're facing what I would call a challenging digital environment, and I don't need to tell those who have joined us virtually today of the abuses of the internet, suppression of online freedoms, and the evolving challenge of, in particular, disinformation, the threats to human rights and democratic institutions globally. And the real world consequences of these challenges, you could argue are more apparent now than they've ever been. As I speak, there is a war in Europe where disinformation and propaganda online is playing a key role. Now, here in New Zealand, we recognise the critical importance of protecting and promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms and the modern threats to both. And that's why I'm really honoured, amongst all of those that you could have called to speak today, to be the first head of government to address RightsCon, because the issues that RightsCon addresses deserve leader-level attention, because as I say, these are some of the most important issues that we could be talking about today. So I'm pleased, Brett, to start the conversation.
Thank you so much. We might cut that little clip and send it off to other world leaders for next year's event. Because I agree, I think these issues have moved, to the CEO level, to the board level, to the Prime Minister and President level, and that's the appropriate thing. I actually wanted to kick off, you're the Prime Minister of New Zealand, smack bang in the middle of the Asia Pacific region. It might be a good place to start, particularly given the increasing global focus on your region. Could you reflect for a moment on the path forward for the advancement of digital rights from the Asia Pacific region? And I also say that because we have hundreds of people from all across Asia Pacific who are here today and will participate over the coming 5 days.
I think if you're thinking about our region, it's a snapshot of the diversity, the opportunity and the challenge, or within this large and diverse Asia Pacific region. We've got a spectrum of cultures, a spectrum of political systems in our region, and very different approaches to the issues of digital rights. So as a region, on the plus side, we're known for digital innovation and advances, research and development, tech entrepreneurship. Such openness and innovation, though, does not always translate to robust protections of digital rights.
Right.
So you can see that play out in some parts of our region. If I was to give an example, Myanmar, that's a stark example with the erosion of rights online and offline, including freedom of expression, media freedoms, and democratic rights are playing out every day.
Yeah.
From a New Zealand perspective, digital rights, though, should be grounded in free, open, secure, and increasingly you'll hear an interoperable internet. And in this context, we really welcome and have signed up to the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, which was launched in late April.
Yeah.
But I think what's fundamental to us is that all of these challenges that we face as a region to think about a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance, which is embedded in the Declaration. And you'll see in the way that we approach many of these challenges that multi-stakeholder approach is fundamental to the way we operate. Open dialogue, debate, accountability, transparency, and multi-stakeholderism, it makes a difference. And that is how we'll drive effective and enduring change. So to those who are championing that within Asia Pacific and elsewhere, we support you.
Again, I think I'm going to take that clip and send it to many of the leaders in the region who don't see multi-stakeholderism as the appropriate approach, that are thinking very much about, clamping down. Thanks for raising the country, Myanmar. Many of our colleagues are online. Many of our colleagues have left the country because of that online repression. Not just a question of not being multi-stakeholder, but actually being persecuted for being members of civil society or members of community who's calling for democracy and so on. Not just in Myanmar, across all of the democracies as well. Even, in my own country of Australia, we've seen, a lot of new laws that are being passed that have implications for all of us. And I think that one of the reasons why governments are pushing so hard is, or as an excuse, is to deal with this issue of violent extremist content and terrorist content. And, it's definitely a plague. It's plagued your own country. It led to the Christchurch call. We've seen it most recently, violent extremist and terrorist content in the US. So maybe you can give us a sense of when you think about that idea of how governments and companies and civil society can work together on this issue of preventing the spread of terrorist and violent extremist content. What are the lessons that you've learned from the Christchurch call? I think it's very pertinent right now. We really need to make sure that we don't have these knee-jerk reactions, that we don't have laws and policies that are covering up for really repression of other voices. I'd love to hear what you've learned and what you have to share with us.
When I think back to the immediate aftermath of March 15, 2019 in New Zealand, sadly, so many countries have experienced something similar to what we experienced perpetrated against our Muslim community. But what happened here was different, and because it was broadcast, it was so clearly designed to be broadcast online, and that was a global first. So I remember a lot of pressure coming on for New Zealand to respond to the online element of that terrorist act. And politicians necessarily, as others do, reach for whatever's in their toolbox. And what's in a politician's toolbox is regulation and legislative change. But what became clear to me was that if that was our only response, it would unlikely be a successful one in the long term, because regulation can often be a blunt instrument. It's not the only answer, particularly in areas where the environment changes so rapidly. And so that was one of the reasons we took stock of what we experienced and asked ourselves, how will we create enduring change, and how can we do it together? So I remember reaching out to President Emmanuel Macron, and we founded the Christchurch Call in 2019. And at its heart was that idea of multi-stakeholderism, working together on the solution. So governments, we have that responsibility to keep our citizens safe, to protect their human rights and freedoms, but making sure that we would use regulation where it is needed and where it is effective. Companies, they have the data, the tools, and the resources. I would argue it's in their interest, and always has been, to make sure that they're keeping their customers safe and that they're contributing constructively to these issues, because everyone agrees we don't want an environment where violent extremism and terrorism is perpetuated online. And civil society, through the Cause Advisory Network, has provided expertise, knowledge, advice, caution, and wisdom. And the reason there, Brett, I just want to dwell on civil society. It's very easy in a liberal democracy like New Zealand to think about these challenges from a particular lens. We have, it's incumbent on us to make sure is that we reach into these issues, we're thinking about it from the perspective of some nations and citizens who may not have their rights protected as a starting point. And so it's critical civil society brings that lens and that caution to make sure that what we do is fit for purpose beyond our own borders.
Yeah, and for many people, who are on the call, but also, internet users around the world, it's actually often the state itself that's the perpetrator of the violence. And I think many organizations are coping with, a state that is designing legislation, designing regulation, forcing the hands of their own companies and also foreign companies to criminalize speech, to invade privacy, and to put populations at risk. And so, it's really good that you point out the kind of dichotomy there, and again, in the region, but also globally.
Yeah, and this is why within the Christchurch Call, we embedded those principles. And so, although it was a reaction to a horrific terrorist attack, we at the same time acknowledged that in our response, we needed everything that we did to be embedded around free, open, and secure internet. So we have now, at my last count, we have 55 government supporters, and in the onboarding process, we apply this lens as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the other piece, of course, that you mentioned is the role of the company, and we, as Access Now, but also many organizations around the world, have been pushing the companies to understand how content and information is weaponized, and how important it is
Indeed.
to have language, to understand the language in which hate is expressed. We've dealt with this in Ethiopia, in Myanmar, in India, across the globe, and to allocate the proper resources, not to just have the algorithm, but to have proper human resources, which has, labor implications as well, but, have proper human resources that are allocated to this issue, because we know it's not going away. And also the technologies are changing. And I actually wanted to ask you, in the context about the metaverse, and there's been a lot of conversation about what is this next generation of technology? What is this next generation of decentralized internet, Web3, etc. There's a lot of buzzwords, but like, how are you thinking as a government when you think about these new technologies in terms of regulation or in terms of innovation or in terms of setting guardrails?
And that's a great way to express it, whether it's called, Web 3.0 or metaverse or something else entirely. The changes we're seeing, or the new ways of interacting online, is upon us, and it's moving very, very quickly. And this offers opportunities that perhaps many would have only previously imagined, but as with all new technologies, it will also present new manifestations of risk. And so we need to think about both the set of challenges to protection of rights, which we need to better understand, but we also need to anticipate the issues that we might encounter instead of reacting further down the track. And that work should be underway now rather than after, because that risks realized harm. And we've also learned through experience, as you and I were discussing, that retrofitting solutions is so hard. And much of what we've experienced around the Christchurch call are attempts to retrofit solutions. And so this is a time for stakeholders, and as I've already expressed in my view, a multi-stakeholder approach on the topic. It's a time to hear from technologists who are creating and living already in this world, the policymakers navigating these issues, lawyers, academics, and activists. We need to be working collectively now. And that means co-development and co-design, not just consultation, because these issues are upon us. The one thing I would also add is that from government's perspectives, whilst policymakers are very much in this space, I think governments, by and large, will still be grappling with retrofitting the environment we're in now. And it does mean that there's perhaps not as much thinking going into the what next as there needs to be.
I think we in civil society are finding that, like, we're dealing with the long tail, like, we're working on the AI Act in the European Union context, but at the same time, we're also meant to be like on quantum computing, which is 5 or 10 years away. It seems to have been 5 or 10 years away for the last, 30 years. But this idea about how do we actually preempt, how do we avoid the next need for the Christchurch call? Because in the metaverse, we actually, or whatever, is yet to come, we have the proper frameworks in place. So I have one other question, if that's okay, which is related to the algorithmic recommender systems. I know that New Zealand's been looking into this. How are you engaging with the private sector on this? And any lessons or any wisdom from this topic?
You'll see that right from the beginning of the Christchurch call to action, we saw algorithms as key to the work that we need to do as part of the Christchurch call. And there were a couple of areas that we really did prioritise straight off the bat. The role of the GIFT-CT, the crisis response protocol, all which have made a difference. But we're now really turning our minds to the issue of algorithms. Now, this is a harder space, but interestingly, whilst some might argue that this comes at it from perhaps a lens around a challenge to free speech, I would argue that in an environment where almost everything is curated, it's really important that users have visibility of that curation and they make informed choices about their environment. So I come at this from a users' rights approach as well. And so in the spirit of a free, open and secure internet, there is a need for improved transparency and at the same time, a much clearer understanding of the outcomes of algorithmic processes. So this is where we see online service providers, they have a responsibility. They develop and curate these processes. And where we see outcomes that lead to identifiable harms, they have a responsibility to change course and develop solutions. So this is the next frontier, really, for all of us. We're coming in with a constructive spirit. We've always said we respect the protections around proprietary tools that's been built into the call. But let's make our starting point transparency and research that enables us to see these impacts, and then that will help us develop collectively the solutions that are needed.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for raising that. And I do think that, we've often said that the algorithm is the black box. The issue of, coming back to this issue of content and propagation of violent content, like how it gets picked up by the algorithm, how
Yeah.
we as users don't necessarily know why that happens, that sort of content ends up in our feed and then gets retweeted and reposted and so on.
And sometimes the providers can't tell us why either. And
Yeah.
this becomes extremely problematic from a policymaker's perspective. We can see sometimes that we have a problem, but we can't necessarily tell you how we got there. How do you define a solution in that environment? So let's begin with transparency and just get around the table to work on those solutions together.
Yeah, and I would say allied to transparency is ensuring that the human rights framework is embedded into the algorithm, because we can have transparency of poor process and poor outcomes and poor algorithms. We want actually the human rights framework embedded, which is probably a good ending point for this conversation, even though I'd love to talk with you for the whole full hour of the opening ceremony. We've got lots of great content coming forward, and we've got over 500 sessions throughout the week. Hopefully you'll have some time to dip in. I know some of your team will be at RightsCon, but any final parting words that you'd like to convey to the delegates that are here for the opening of RightsCon in its 11th edition?
Thank you, Brett. To close, my words would be simple, and it's just simply to say thank you, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, from us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for the critically important work that you're doing. It is critical. And at this particular juncture that we're at now, more than ever, it's so important that we work together. And I see all of you as being playing a critical role. We all have to be at the table. We won't find the solutions otherwise.
Thank you so much.
Such an interesting conversation. And we have Brett Solomon, Executive Director of Access Now, joining us in the studio. Brett, of all the leaders out there, I wonder, why did RightsCon reach out to her?
Well, I think you can see from what she said, the importance of civil society, the way in which governments need to listen as well as speak and act, that decision makers need to think intentionally. You know, she talked about human rights, which is so essential to the development and of technologies around the world and their application. I think she's the perfect choice. But as I said, like, we're looking forward to more heads of state. We've got 64 governments in attending RightsCon this year. So there's a lot of heads of state to attend and to participate and to listen to this community, which is so vital.
So interesting. And of course, I know that RightsCon really wants to impress on everyone that diversity of events that's going to be happening over the next week. And what better way to do that by starting out with some music. RightsCon is so excited to present to you Amel Matlouthi. She is a Tunisian musician, and many of you may remember her from over a decade ago when one of her songs became an anthem for the Tunisia Revolution.
Yep.
And again, so excited. Her latest album came out in the last 2 years, and we present to you Amel Matlouthi.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to RightsCon, the world leading summit on human rights in the digital age. I'm very happy to be here to share some of my music and my words with this community. I chose 2 very significant songs from my repertoire, 2 songs that represent a lot of hope and freedom. To me, in a world like the world we're in today, a world where human life is less worth than profit, human life is less worth than political greed, in a world where oceans are full of oil and plastic, in a world where our forests are burning, our planet is heating, and our children, men and women, drown at sea trying to reach an impossible coast to dream for a better future. I think in this world, the best we have is art and music to light our path and fill it with hopes and dreams and freedom and truth, so that maybe we could build a better and more beautiful tomorrow. لو كنت غامض عيني وتاخذني الأحلام أميدية ونعلى ونحلق في السماء عصاها الظلم والبؤس والقهر من واقع عاصر يعبث بي كل من يبني دنيا علت فيها أسرار طغيان صاح خافين أحلاما أحلام وعم الظلام والأنانية في كل القلوب لو كنت مغمض عيني تاخذني الأحلام من إيديا ونعلى ونحلق في سما جديدة وننسى رجايا لو كنت مسافر في خيالي نزرع ونبني قصور ليالي يكبر فيها الحب وآمالي ونمحي الآلام.
And some of you may also remember that Amel Mathlouthi performed at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in 2015. That's when the Tunisia Quartet won that honor. Of course, that group, the team of rivals that helped shore up the young democracy at that time. And now we pivot to Ukraine. RightsCon is thrilled to be able to have the Deputy Minister of Digital Transformation joining us, Valeria Ionan. She was the youngest deputy minister to join at the time, at the age of 28. And before that, she was an entrepreneur with a lot of knowledge of the tech and startup community.
Good morning, colleagues.
Hi, Minister.
Honored to be with you today. Thank you
Yes.
for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we also have Brett here with us. And I think, Brett, maybe it's best to have you start with the question.
Okay, well, Minister, thank you so much for joining. We understand how precious your time is. And of course, all of us from the RightsCon community, we wish you all the best for you and your family and of course for your country.
Thank you for your support.
I wanted to ask you, I think this is really the first time that the world has woken up to the power of technology and its impact on combat and conflict, from AI to disinformation to cyber attacks. Can you give us a sense of how important tech is to your efforts to both respond to the attack and also, hopefully, also to achieve peace?
Thank you. So as we continue to repeat, modern war needs or requires modern solutions. From the first day of war, we realized that we needed to come up with a completely new strategy to counter Russian military aggression. It is also very important to understand that this is the war between past and the future. The past is full of military equipment, clumsy tanks, and outrageous lies. And the future is about technology. Therefore, the new military strategy must include new digital solutions. And I would say that our Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, did a lot of homework prior to the war. And by homework, I mean, since the establishment of the ministry in September 2019, we started to develop a digital infrastructure that would help to build a digital state. So only in 2.5 years, we've covered 97% of Ukraine with high-speed fixed internet. We started a tech educational reform, and almost 2 million of Ukrainians went through a basic digital literacy program. We started the reform of cyber sector, which has contributed a lot to our cybersecurity. And of course, we were developing digital public services. So in 2020, we've launched DIA mobile application, which is now used by 17 million of Ukrainian people.
Right.
And we have also developed a special web portal DIA, so our citizens can get access to electronic documents, digital signature tools, and over 80 governmental services online. And this altogether became really a solid basis for Ukrainian resistance on cyber frontline. And when the war started on the 24th of February, we had to adjust our work really very quickly. And those previous achievements with building DI ecosystem, with building digital infrastructure, really helped us a lot, because after taking some time, and by some time I mean a couple of days,
Right.
to find some safe places, we continued to develop new services
Minister?
in DI application. For example, we
Minister?
have developed very quickly the service, which is an assistance to the army, which is an opportunity to transfer funds to the army, or an e-support program, which is a financial assistance for people from regions where
Minister, if I can
were
interject.
taking.
Yeah.
And-
Can I interject a little bit, because you've
Sure.
talked so much about the information gathering, but there's always, of course, a double-edged sword with this kind of technology. Collecting data about the citizens, for example, worked very well in peacetime, but then in wartime, there's always the danger, for example, that an opponent, the Russians, would get information and data on the citizens. So how have you dealt with that? And if I may also add, one thing we're particularly curious about is we've been reading that the Ukrainian government has used the services of an American company, Clearview AI. One of the primary reasons has been to ID dead, killed Russian soldiers in order for your government, for people to inform the next of kin. Now, I can well imagine that for humanitarian reasons, that is a good thing. But of course, whenever we use technology, it's very complicated. One question, for example, is what if you ID the wrong person? And so you just mentioned that you had to make a lot of decisions on a lot of things in a short amount of time. And I wonder what kind of ethical questions were you considering with both Clearview AI use and also, as you said, the data, protecting the data of Ukrainian citizens?
Yes, thank you. Very, very important questions. So first of all, we are using the most creative and high-tech solutions, and among them using AI in the process of the identification of Russian soldiers, as you have mentioned. And it is important for us as it serves two different goals. The first one is to inform relatives in Russia on the real situation in Ukraine by spreading the truth, and also by creating a database of war criminals, which will be used later on by international court when time comes. And we also have united the forces of different international companies, and we have done lots of media campaigns, which cost millions and millions, to try to inform and to show the photos, to show the right messages to Russian people, hoping that they will see it, they will see the truth, and they will go to protest, and they will go to the streets, and they will have their voice, and they will try to stop this war.
Yeah.
And definitely, this instrument is very important for us right now. And as for the cybersecurity issues, so it is also very important to mention that Russia has been attacking governmental web sources very actively since 2014. And before, we never have responded to their attacks. We only defended ourselves. But literally a week before the start of the war, on the 15th of February, we experienced the largest cyber attack in the history of Ukraine. Millions of dollars were spent on it. Mm-hmm. We managed to deal with it and eliminate the consequences for government and information resources.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's essential that we do understand the importance of connectivity to conflict. Access Now runs the Keep It On Coalition. We spend a lot of time tracking internet shutdowns and also cyber attacks as well. Your minister requested that that the Russian internet be, broken off from the international internet. And, this idea about how do not just Ukrainians, but also how do Russians oppose the war, and how do they connect with, to show that there's actually disagreement with Putin. How important do you think connectivity is for Ukraine, but also for the citizens of Russia? I know it's a difficult question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think one of the things that's really clear here is that often human rights are the first victim of warfare, you know, whether it be the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to association. And so, you know, as we enter into this whole new field, this whole new realm where technology is an essential part of conflict and an essential part of war, how do you feel that, how do we protect rights in this context?
Well, you see, I think that you cannot put these two questions together in one. The thing is that we have a wartime now here. So there is an aggressor who is literally killing our people, raping our women. And I know this conference is not about this, but since you're asking about the importance of human rights and connectivity, I can't just not mention it. So we have an aggressor, and I think that the policy in the wartime and in the peaceful time should have a difference. Because when you have an aggressor, you have to defend yourself with all possible measures. Of course, it is very important to, you know, to do everything under the convention statute, of course. But nevertheless, the first thing is to defend our people with all possible ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, you know, many of us, I mean, there are many conflicts happening around the world. Obviously, Ukraine is very much on the agenda. I think people who are experiencing both hot and cold conflicts are seeing the role of technology, are seeing the kind of trade-offs that have to happen. Of course, we appreciate the situation in Ukraine. You know about it much better than we do. I want to also acknowledge, as I say, many of the other conflicts that are taking place around the world, because I think that, and we're going to hear from a few of those folks later.
Yeah. Well, Minister, thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we turn to Afghanistan, and from a politician to a journalist. We have Zara Nedar joining us. She has a lot of experience covering women's rights issues and the stories of women in Afghanistan. These days, she has to work overseas, but you'll see plenty of her work in the New York Times, Foreign Policy. I believe her latest article appeared in Time magazine, and she also partners with lots of women-centered organizations, including the Fuller Project in Washington, D.C., and also Rakshana Media in almost all women Afghan newsroom. So Zara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa, for giving me all this opportunity to speak here today. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Right, and so I would like to start by asking if you can debrief us on some of the stories you've been working on regarding women in Afghanistan and the situation right now.
Thank you. So I'm hoping to give you an overview of like what is really happening or how I do see it, if that's okay, and then we can talk.
Absolutely.
As an Afghan journalist and an Afghan woman, I am living my worst nightmares, knowing that millions of women in Afghanistan are deprived of their basic human rights solely on the basis of their sex. Since the Taliban took over Afghanistan on August 15, they have waged war on the women of Afghanistan. They are systematically trying to erase women from society, effectively imprison them in their own houses. The Taliban have banned women from almost all jobs, from secondary education, traveling, and sometimes even walking to the market without a male chaperone. Last month, the Taliban issued a decree requiring women, including female anchors on the TV, to cover their face when in public or on television screen. If women fail to comply, their male guardians will be punished. Afghanistan was already the worst country to be a woman, but the Taliban's policies are making survival impossible. Women and girls are already bearing the brunt of economic crisis and hunger in the country, and now their dead bodies are being found all across the country. Femicide is in the rise in Afghanistan. Women who dared to protest the Taliban have been beaten, abducted, imprisoned, and some of them are being found dead. Afghanistan is now a women's rights crisis, and the women of Afghanistan need your support and solidarity in their struggle for their basic human rights. Please don't be bystanders. to the subjugation and oppression of women in Afghanistan. Women of Afghanistan are human and they deserve their rights to education, work, freedom, to be respected, to be protected. To stand for women's rights in Afghanistan, we can all start by calling on our governments to sanction the Taliban and the countries that are supporting the building of a gender apartheid regime in Afghanistan. Make your voice heard and make sure the world knows that you don't stand for oppression and subjugation of women anywhere in the world. So that is my take on really what's happening in Afghanistan, and I'm happy if we have any question, Melissa, Brent, to answer.
Yeah, Zara, I am wondering how you're able to continue doing your work. Are you using technology? What kind of technology are you using to get information in Afghanistan and to communicate to those there? And how are you disseminating and spreading the stories that you're working on?
Thank you. So the way I am working is that mainly through telecommunication and internet, I get access. So I have a network of women journalists and other journalists in Afghanistan that I connect with them. And also we try to use mainly social media to reach people to know what's happening in the country and find ways to connect with them. So far we have access to internet and telecommunication, but we are not 100% sure how these platforms are secure or how the Taliban can access them. So we are also worried for the female journalists and male journalists in the country who are currently working, especially with the security and the Taliban trapping their system, their phones. This is our concern.
I'm also curious, do you know if women who are not able to access education, very quickly here, how are they doing it? Are some of them going online, perhaps, and taking courses that are available overseas?
It is interesting because I think one of the considerations both here in Afghanistan, but also globally, where we're seeing many of these conflicts, is the diaspora, is the fact that, you know, many journalists are having to, and civil society are having to flee. And, you know, the situation is the same obviously in Afghanistan. The other thing that I think reflects as well across both countries that we've just heard from is the issue of gender. And I'm really pleased that Access Now and RightsCon is putting this firmly on the agenda. Human rights abuses online and offline are gendered often. So it'd be great to hear some of the sort of workarounds in terms of that education issue for sure.
Yes, we do actually have a lots of Afghan diaspora and also Afghan educators, teachers, and activists inside the country setting up from the very early days, setting up their own ways, like mainly online education for girls. However, the main problem is there is little access. So the Afghans who have access to technology and internet are very
limited.
Small
Right.
minority, and they don't have. So the main problem is not all people who they don't have access to technology and internet to be able to continue their education online.
Zara Nader, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And now we pivot to the Philippines. We are speaking
It feels
to...
like a story of woe all over the place. And I think one of the, just as we do move to a very important story from the Philippines, I think it's important to note as well just the power and the resilience of civil society. Like whilst all of these conflicts are happening, you know, the way in which the community is rising. I've been thinking about civil society on the rise as a kind of theme for RightsCon for this year, because it is so impressive the way that, you know, people like Zara and our previous singer have, you know, really inspired us and their communities to be able to move forward in the context of so many different issues that they're facing.
Because it's so easy to think of the glass half empty and worry about authoritarianism and so on and so forth. So no, it's a really, really good point. And so we turn to a very serious situation here with Mylene Cabalona. She is the leader of an organization called the BPO Industry Employees Network. That's a mouthful, BIEN. And the organization is basically a union representing those in what's called the business process outsourcing sector, so BPO, essentially call centers. And you're probably wondering what that has to do with the Human Rights Summit, but it gets pretty tough and scary pretty quickly. Mylene and her colleagues are the victims of a disinformation and misinformation campaign online. Online trolls, supporters of the president over the last few years, Rodrigo Duterte, attack them, saying that they are terrorists, saying they are communists. And these are very serious accusations. Civil society activists in the Philippines have been killed, dozens of them, over the years. And as a result, sometimes, for example, I understand Mylene has to go into hiding or not be very clear where she's operating from. So Mylene, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good morning, Melissa. Good morning, Britt.
Yeah, that was a little introduction, but can you debrief us a little bit more about your situation?
Yeah, I actually have a short briefer if you'd like, so you'd have an idea as to what's going on in the country and with
Absolutely.
us. Yes, so yeah, I'm from the BPO Industry Employees Network. We're call center employees. We have come together to claim our rights and uphold our welfare. We have formed the biggest organization in our sector, the BPO Industry Employees Network, or BIEN. We have asserted that the boom in the sector should mean the protection of our rights and welfare. Through the years, we have waged many campaigns and advocacies for this. Now, through painstaking work, we have formed the first enterprise-based union in the industry, the Unified Employees of Valorica. We have also conducted widespread consultation to come up with the BPO Workers' Welfare Act and have it filed in the Philippine Congress. We have also worked with the BIEN's affiliation with the UNI Global Union to strengthen solidarity to our struggle. But we have faced many challenges under the authoritarian presidency of Rodrigo Duterte, of course. We have been repeatedly labeled by the government as communist, terrorist fronts, simply because we are very vocal and often critical. In our country, such accusations go hand in hand with human rights violations. One of our organizers actually was arrested and jailed on the basis of trump-up charges. This was 2019. And thanks to our campaign and to overwhelming support and solidarity, Ms. Ann Kruger, our organizer, is now free on bail. Now, one of the ways that the Philippine government spreads this labeling or red tagging is through social media, mostly Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
Numerous Facebook accounts and pages have been spreading these dangerous and deadly lies to the public, together with other messages that poison public discourse and eliminate democratic discourse in favor of the government. And we see such threats and repression continuing under the new presidency of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the former dictator and Duterte's ally. And of course, we vow to continue fighting for our rights and welfare and thus contributing to democracy. And of course, we look forward to and are very thankful to your continued solidarity.
Thank you, and thanks so much for your comments, and also, you know, for your hard work in very serious circumstances. Obviously, you're looking for allies, those who can support you across civil society, but also within the tech sector. And I'm wondering whether Facebook and Amazon and Verizon and others are actually helping to articulate the concerns, helping to provide you with some protections. What's the relationship that you're having with the private tech sector?
Actually, that's a very good question. These big companies are hiring people in the Philippines through third parties. And we try to, as much as possible, reach out, engage with these third parties through social dialogues, but to no avail, of course. We are a labor association, but we're not a union, so we don't have any bargaining power, and our industry is highly non-unionized. And I think most companies prefer it like that. So we basically don't have any protection from them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, you know, many of us who have been involved in the issues around content moderation, you know, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, we're talking about, you know, content that incites violence, leads to genocide, etc. And we've been saying we don't want the algorithm to determine the legality or otherwise of speech. We want people to do so. This is the flip side of that. I think we really need to be conscious of the labour conditions and of the human rights of those who are in the content moderation world. And so, yeah, I think, and again, it's a gendered issue as well. So.
Absolutely, and hopefully through RightsCon, you can actually find somebody at Facebook or
that's
others
right.
to
I
connect
mean, many
with,
of the
right?
companies, there's 560 odd companies that are present at RightsCon. We're more than happy to help facilitate a conversation with some of those big companies and with the governments as well. So, yeah, please stay tuned.
That's greatly appreciated, Red and Melissa.
Thank you.
Well, activism right now happening in this studio. Mylene, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Well, Brett, that was the last interview of the opening ceremony. I know that we've kind of ricocheted around the world, zoomed into Afghanistan, Ukraine, New Zealand, the Philippines.
Where's next? Well, I think,
Yeah.
there are so many sessions throughout the week that are focused on particular countries. Many of the issues are across regions, across sector groups, etc. This is one of the beauties of RightsCon. I think we should also mention Myanmar. Many of the human rights defenders from Myanmar have contacted us, asked if we could raise their plight in the opening ceremony, which I think is absolutely essential. And the last 2 weeks have been horrendous for the Burmese, the people of Myanmar, who have engaged and who have had to engage with internet shutdowns. Again, human rights abuses have taken place under the shroud of darkness, which is extremely concerning and something that we've seen around the world. And one last thing that I'd like to mention before you speak with Daphne, is to raise our friend, our colleague, Alaa Abdel Fattah, who spoke at RightsCon 2011, the first RightsCon in Silicon Valley. He got on a plane in full knowledge that he would face a military tribunal back then in 2011. He's been pretty much in detention, in prison since then. And I'd like to...
This past decade.
Yeah, the last decade. So we should think about what we've all done for the last decade. I'd like to play a clip just for 1 minute, which looks at Alaa's keynote speech from Silicon Valley back in 2011. Alaa, the floor is yours.
Hi. Let me just take 30 seconds off topic and talk about extraordinary justice, which is what I'm going to be facing, military prosecutor. There's obviously no due process. Civilians shouldn't be facing that. I urge you to find ways to stand in solidarity with anyone who is facing extraordinary justice. You've had your share of it with the Guantanamo detainees here in this country. So if you care about human rights, you know what it's like and you know why it's important. There are around 12,000 civilians in Egypt who are currently in military prison. Some of them for participating in the revolution that the military pretends to have protected and sided with, some for very minor offenses. Mostly they're being randomly detained around major events in which it is the military who has committed the crimes and not the civilians. So I urge you to find ways to stand in solidarity with anyone who is facing extraordinary justice. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can see what a beautiful, powerful, and important actor, blogger, software developer that he is. But two things have changed since then. One, in the last year, he's become a British citizen through his mother. And secondly, Alaa is also on a hunger strike. I think he's on day 66, which is extraordinary. We've met with his family has met with the UK Foreign Office to try and gain consular access, which the Egyptian government is currently denying. And we have also met with the Foreign Office myself, actually 2 weeks ago in London. They have been working to try to get access and for him to be released. And we call upon the UK Foreign Office to continue in its efforts at its highest levels, not just to have him released, but also at this point, I would say, to save his life. So thanks very much.
And what can the RightsCon community do? There's
actually a petition and a campaign up on the top left-hand corner of accessnow.org where people can actually respond to this crisis. And the reason why we raise Alaa every year, it's not just about him. It is about the thousands of people for whom speech has been criminalised, whether they be detained or otherwise.
Well, thank you so much, Brett. So we will now turn to Emel Mathlouthi and another song and performance from her.
أنا حر كلمتي حرة أنا حر كلمتي حرة ما تنساش حق الخبز وما تنساش زرع الغصة وما تنساش خاين البيت
That was really beautiful. Well, to send us out, I'm now joined, Brett has left, I'm now joined by Daphne Ugarte of Access Now. Daphne, I understand you have some housekeeping to tell everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have a participant guide available, which is a good resource that we've put together to help everyone make the best out of the RightsCon experience. Participants can find information on how they can set up their profile on the platform, how they can set their time zones so they can see the sessions that are happening in their own local time, how they can build their personalized agenda to there's also really good information about like the types of sessions that we'll have this year. For example, we have panels, fireside chats, in-conversation interviews that will have unlimited attendance. Whereas we have also workshops and community labs and social hour formats, which do have limited attendance.
So they're smaller.
Exactly. Yeah. So these limited sessions, they will close once they reach the participation cap. But if participants aren't able to make it into a session of their choice, into their first choice, there's always going to be programming available that they can tune into. For example, lightning talks and tech demos, which are available on the platform at all times. Yeah, and one last thing to note is the help section that we have on the platform. There's very useful information there, how to get in touch with us if participants have any questions, whether they're general questions or any safety and security concerns. So we have dedicated teams that are there and ready to support everyone. And speaking about support, I also wanted to and thank all of our sponsors, take a moment to thank them. We have for their support, like without them, RightsCon wouldn't be possible. So a big thank you to them. And to wrap up, I now will hand it over to our Access Now team who would like to say hello and welcome everybody to this year's summit.
Ah, there they are. Hello. Hi, guys. Thanks so much for everything that you do. And with that, we conclude the opening ceremony. I have a program preview coming up, and in the next 15 minutes, the first sessions begin. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay engaged.